Let's talk about the rules governing letters of credit and their importance in international trade, and very specifically the UCP, the Uniform Customs and Practice for Documentary Credits. And you talked about UCP 400, UCP 500. Can you just give an overview about what the UCP rules are before we go into the numbers?
Yeah, the letters of credit issued globally by every bank in every country. They have to issue letters of credit to facilitate international trade transactions, and they are governed by UCP 600, which are the international rules. Now, the reason when these rules were first evolved or adopted by International Chamber of Commerce, that was way back in 1932 or 1933, when the ICC decided that, notwithstanding clear contractual guidelines spelling out the obligations, responsibilities, and rights of parties to an international trade, there was still a scope of misinterpretation and misunderstanding, because buyer and seller are from two different countries, sometimes very separated by huge distances. So the problem was that there used to be disputes, commercial disputes, because of the misunderstanding and misinterpretations of the terms of the contract. So ICC decided that these should be not regulated, but there should be a clear set of guidelines. So they called it not the rules, but customs and practice. And for more than 70 years, they were known as customs and practice. It was first time that ICC decided that these customs and practice were actually rules. That was only in the last version of UCP, which is UCP 600. So Article 1 of UCP 600 defines that these are rules. Before that, they were never known as rules. So, yeah, rules, of course, are mandatory when a transaction is subject to the rules. However, these are not, laws. So UCP 600 are basically separate from the laws. And if there is a local law in any country, then the local law will override the provisions of UCP if these provisions are in conflict with the local laws. So that's actually ICC's policy articulation also. So what benefit is there, to provide guidance to the parties dealing in documentary credits? And the parties are, one, the importer, which is known as applicant. Number two, the exporter, which is known as the beneficiary, and the exporter's bank and importer's bank. UCP 600 have been given a statutory basis by certain countries. They adopt it, for instance, China, India, all over Europe, and most places where UCP are actually, where there are government guidelines that letters of credit issued in our country are automatically subject to the ICC publication number, blah, blah, blah. And China, when they came out just before UCP 600, the Supreme Court of China came out with a regulation on letters of credit, stating that in China, all letters of credit are automatically subject to the current version of UCP, for the reason that today it is UCP 500, tomorrow after 10 years it will be UCP 600. So do you go and make an amendment to the law?
Yeah.
So what they said, current version.
Yeah, yeah.
So automatically, and that is what inspired the banks, that when they ask an applicant to apply for a letter of credit, the undertaking or the agreement of the applicant is always subject to current version. Because previously they used to say UCP 500.
Yeah.
But when UCP 600 came, the banks had, if nothing else, they had to rewrite their application forms and undertakings whereby the importer states that it is subject to the current version of UCP rather than UCP 600 or 700 for that matter.
Pradeep, can you give an overview of what the UCP 600 rules actually are and who benefits from them?
So in order to understand UCP 600, I always suggest that you should know UCP 500 and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Like for understanding UCP 500, because it was an improvement on the 400 and 600 is an improvement on 500. So what are the, in order to understand what are the benefits of UCP 600, one has to understand the disadvantages of UCP 500 and how UCP 600 improved on UCP 500. UCP 500 was a fantastic document, but there were a lot of imprecise, interpretative terms and phrases used, which led to many times disputes. For example, UCP 500 said, and the predecessors of UCP, that a bank should examine documents presented under a letter of credit with reasonable care. Now, how do you define reasonable care? And if there is a dispute, and if it goes to the court, how do you prove to the court that I, as a bank, checked the documents with reasonable care? Another issue was reasonable time. The bank has to, that was prior to UCP 500, bank has to examine documents within a reasonable time, which was never described. Later on, there were several court cases and ICC Banking Commission opinions on this, what constitutes reasonable time. Then they said it would depend upon the circumstances of each transaction. So sometimes, depending upon the circumstances and the number of documents, the volumes of documents which are presented, a document may be checked in one day or maybe in 1 hour. But it might take 3 days, 5 days, or 7 days, depending upon the circumstances. In fact, one of the documents which was presented to a bank was weighing 13 kgs. And it was actually operational manuals with volumes. You know, somebody was importing capital equipment, plant and machinery, and then there were, handbooks to how to do that.
Yeah.
How the bank letter of credit said, manual specifying, the operative instructions. Now, how the bank is supposed to check, and I understand that one court ruled that to check this document containing so many volumes and such a big weight, it will take almost a year to check the documents. But that is not the purpose of LCs and the purpose of UCP to take that much time. But then this UCP 500 came out with a regulation, with a rule that documents have to be checked within a reasonable period, not exceeding 7 banking days. Now again, they use the word reasonable time and not exceeding. So banks took it for granted that I have 7 days time to check the documents. And on the 7th day, they will refuse the document. Not the day they receive the documents or the very next day. For the reasons, there were some, unfortunately, there will always be practices to accommodate an applicant, and these are not very ethical practices, I would say. But by delaying your rejection, you are depriving the customer to rectify the documents and represent the documents within the timelines available under the LC. So the banks will naturally take. There was a court case in US, I understand that it was a standby LC, where the only document was required by the standby LC was a demand. The bank rejected the demand on the 7th day. And on the 7th day, the standby LC had already expired. The beneficiary of the LC took the bank to the court, asking the bank, alleging that the bank has unethically delayed my rejection and took advantage of UCP 500 by and depriving me of my right to rectify my demand. And the court checked the demand and determined that the reasonable time to check the demand was half an hour. So why did the bank took 7 days? So they actually ruled against the bank, and notwithstanding the provisions of UCP. So this is one very small.
That helps us inform what UCP 600 rules might be and how we improve the rules.
So UCP looked into UCP 600, had a drafting group, I would say some of the best in the world. Then it was having, for the first time in the history of ICC, ICC Banking Commission decided to have another group which will review the initial drafts of the UCP and advise the drafting group before they could release to the national committees of ICC globally. So I was privileged to be a part of that consulting group. There were 41 people and drawn up from different sectors: legal sector, insurance, transport experts, and of course banking experts, trade finance experts. So this, with the joint collaboration of drafting group and the consulting group, they decided that remove the term reasonable, because it actually creates problems rather than offering solutions. Remove imprecise interpretative terms like banks will check documents which appear to be on its face. So on its face is still there in UCP 600, but only in one article, which relates to examination of the documents. However, it was removed from everywhere in UCP, and the reasonable time was removed, and in its place, not exceeding word was removed. In its place, a maximum. The UCP 600 states that a bank has to examine the documents in a maximum period of 5 banking days.
Yep.
So this was like a compromise solution. Some people said 3 days. Some countries said 7 days. Some even went to the extent of, recommending that it should be 10 days. However, ICC decided to have a compromise between 3 days and 7 days and make it 5 days. And then using the word maximum, that means maximum 5 days. And in case you can do it today, the day you receive the documents, you go ahead and make the payment.
Yeah.
Or maybe tomorrow. But in any case, not exceeding or within a maximum of 5 banking days following the date of receipt of documents. So these are benefits to the parties, to the banks, to the negotiating banks, because the payments are not delayed, etc.
Thank you, Pradeep.